Hi, I'm Rachel and I thought I might try another vlog type video. I'm hot off of doing it all throughout November, so why not keep it up? I'm basing this set of videos for the next 8 days on something I've seen on BookTube, the short story Advent calendar, where some folks, I believe for the days of the Advent, have bought this product where every day of the Advent they get to have a short story to read. So I decided to do my own thing because it better fits what I want to do anyway. I have some short stories that I want to finish, and it happens to be Hanukkah, so I thought I could read one story for each of the nights of Hanukkah. And I wanted to start with this book. I showed it on my channel several months ago. I believe I added it to my Goodreads currently reading shelf back in August. And I want to get through. I have 5 more stories, or 4 more stories now, that I want to get through before I can finally finish off this entire collection. So I'm going to start with The Gold and the Fish. These are all short stories written by Fannie Hurst, who was a popular American writer at the beginning of the 20th century for a few decades. This particular story is one of her most famous. It was first published in Cosmopolitan in August of 1925, and then it was reprinted in Song of Life in 1927. It was reprinted again in something called More Aces, a collection of short stories compiled by the community workers of the New York Guild for the Jewish Blind, also in 1925. And then it was one of her movies that was made into a film in 1929. The title was changed to The Younger Generation. Hurst writes a lot about characters on the Lower East Side who could be seen as Jewish, although sometimes they could easily also be seen as non-Jews too. And Judaism doesn't always figure prominently into her stories, but in this one it does. You know these characters are Jewish. I mean, there's talk of rabbis and bar mitzvahs. And one of the central themes of this story is about assimilation. And it takes place in the 20s, and the younger generation is surpassing the older generation in terms of assimilation and in terms of acquiring wealth and a career. And so the son, Morris Goldfish, decides as he is building his business that he officially changes his name and his entire family's name from Goldfish to Fish. You know, the inference being, you know, to make it sound a little less Jewish. And his sister in particular doesn't take really well to it, and there's some really funny dialogue in this story about them arguing about it. And then it turns out she goes off to marry a guy who kind of turns out to be a bit of a crook. But things progress from there. The characters are the draw for this story, and there's a whole lot of dialogue. There's a lot more dialogue in this story actually than in a lot of the earlier ones that I read from her. There is dialogue in those stories, but I feel like there's also a lot more descriptive writing too. And it's interesting that in this story, I think there's less slang than in her earlier stories as well. And I like this story. I thought the dialogue was fun, and the characters were interesting. And I did go ahead and I found the 1929 movie on YouTube. What do you know? I started watching a little bit of it. Well, it's a silent film, but it comes complete with the soundtrack sort of overlaid on top of it. But sometimes the soundtrack cuts out a bit, and you know, there's, you know, it's not 100% well preserved, but you know, you do what you can, and I think it's really cool that it's out there. So I'll leave the link below. And so there we go, one story down. Good evening. It is night 2 of Hanukkah, and I have another Fannie Hurst story that I've gotten through. This one is Song of Life, and it was first published in Cosmopolitan in September 1926, and then it was reprinted in Song of Life in 1927. And it's a rare story, rare for this collection anyway, where Hurst moves away from New York City and into the Midwest. And it takes place around this family who lives on a farm. There's this couple, and they have a ward, and she during the crux of the story is 17, and the husband, patriarch, is starting to, you know, get the feels for her, if you know what I mean. And I was talking yesterday, I think, about how the last story was unusual in that it was so dialogue based without a lot of description, and I guess I have to eat crow or something, because this was very predominantly narrative with a lot less dialogue. And this one really didn't work for me as much, I don't think. Well, first of all, Hearst was going back and forth between the husband and wife's perspectives, and I thought it was a little short for that, I don't know. And the narrative feel made it seem a lot more gossipy, and I just couldn't really connect with the characters as well. And I mean, I appreciate what she was trying to do. She started it actually where the wife had to put down her dog, who she loved, and it sort of is foreshadowing. But I think that Hearst was trying to be sympathetic toward these feelings. I mean, nobody was a big villain here or anything. It was, and not to mention, it was talking relatively frankly, not like overtly, but about, you know, sexual desire with sympathy for everyone involved. So I appreciate that, but just in terms of a story and characters I could care about, it fell a little short for me. So here's hoping for better tomorrow. Good evening from night 3 of Hanukkah. I'm here with yet another Fannie Hurst story. This is the Hoosie-Froosie, hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was first published in Cosmopolitan in September of 1928, and then it was reprinted in Procession in 1929. It's another one of Hearst's stories that takes place in the Midwest, and it features a family with a young, sort of going on blooming daughter and her middle-aged parents. And this one focuses a lot on the mother, who is observing that her daughter is getting newfangled in a lot of ways, and publicly she's supporting her husband and being like, oh, these newfangled lays-about American ways, like where you go to the movies in the middle of the afternoon or something like that. And the Hoosie-Froosie actually is a play on their last name, which is sort of a thing that they instilled in her when she was young about being stalwart and being true to the family and staying true to the values and hardworking and all of that. And there's a lot of commentary just on Americanism and changing mores between generations. It's fascinating because this woman actually is not happy with her life, so she actually is sort of hoping for better for her daughter and sort of unconsciously, well, actually not unconsciously, but just not openly, but secretly advocating for her daughter to get out of the life that is set up for her and her family. So it's interesting, and you can tell how, I guess, the questions that drive Hearst in the 20s, looking at women who are already married versus what she was asking herself in the 10s with women who were looking to get married, and she's kind of critical, I guess, of both of them. Actually, I still had problems with this story. It was too narrative. There was almost no dialogue again, and a lot of the dialogue didn't even have quotation marks, and I kind of wish that Hearst had just, you know, made it into a novel and fleshed things out a little more than she did here. It was much more like a teaser. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff, but I didn't think as a short story it necessarily worked, although I was very intrigued by it. So I don't know, I'm probably being a little too critical, but I only have a couple more at the end left now to read, and I will continue on with that tomorrow. Good evening. It is night 4 of Hanukkah. I'm going to keep this short. I didn't really like this story. I think it might be my least favorite of all the ones I've read in this Fannie Hurst collection, and seeing as I only have one left. This is Funny Face, was first published in Cosmopolitan in July 1931 and reprinted in We Are 10 in 1937, and it's about a man who sells life insurance who gets married and to a woman older than him, and has some doubts about her relationship with another guy, and there's a birth, and I didn't really feel anything for the characters. It was this narrative thing again where it just felt like I was hearing gossip. In terms of the language, in terms of swearing, and in terms of Hearst talking about, you know, adult subjects like sexuality and adultery and sex in general, it was her most blatant in that area, but you know, that doesn't a good story make necessarily. I mean, I could be missing something here, but from my reading, I wasn't that impressed, so we'll just leave it at that. Good evening. It is night 5 of Hanukkah, and my parents are here, and you know, they don't want to be on camera or anything, and so I'll just try to make this quick. I have finally finished my Fannie Hurst collection. It is a Hanukkah miracle. I can finally take it off of my Goodreads currently reading list, and the final story in here is Home James. It was published in Cosmopolitan in June 1936 and then reprinted in We Are 10 in 1937, and then again in A Lady's Pleasure, The Modern Women's Treasure of Good Reading with an introduction by Ilka Chase in 1946. And it was a decent story to end the collection with. It was a short one, and it involved a older couple, like a middle-aged senior couple, who were accepting a friend slash former lover of, well, maybe not lover, but former paramour of the woman. There's a bunch of sort of drama imbued in all of that, and so it was kind of fun to follow these characters around a little bit. They go on a drive, and they're, you know, the woman is sort of acting too crazy, like trying to make things work, and the husband's rolling his eyes, and the guy's kind of the former paramour is kind of a ladies' man. But so I enjoyed the characters, but overall I really enjoyed the first part of this collection a lot better than the second part. So I almost wish I were reading those stories at the end so that I could share my thoughts about those. But I'm going to go write my review of the whole collection, and I'm just so thrilled that I finally have finished this book, and that I can move on and put new things on my currently reading pile. And I will be back tomorrow with 3 more stories in another collection that I am also currently reading, and then I can wrap out my short story Hanukkah celebration. Good evening. It is night 6 of Hanukkah. I just got back from my book club's holiday party, and that was a lot of fun. And I'm reading the final 3 stories, or well, 1 story tonight from this collection. It's called Bertrand Court by Michelle Brafman. She's a local author, local to me. She's writing about a fictional DC suburb and the characters, largely Jews who live there. These are interconnected short stories, but they can be read separately. It's just the characters interact with each other in various stories. And I just read Molly Flanders. It takes place in summer of 2006. These stories largely range from the 1990s to the 2000s, with a few beforehand. This is summer 2006. It involves this character, Molly Flanders, who is recently married, recently moved to Bertrand Court, and during a thunderstorm, she's alone at home. Her husband's on a business trip, and the power goes out, and she goes to her neighbor's house to, you know, get some flashlights or, you know, candles. And she hears the neighbor, Becca Coopersmith, chanting strangely, and she can tell that it's Hebrew, even though she isn't Jewish. She has this flashback to a old elementary school friend's bat mitzvah. And she goes in, and she actually has this really long talk with Becca about her adult bat mitzvah, and the whole thing sort of rouses up these feelings of jealousy that Molly Flanders had about her friend, and about this sort of rite of passage that the friend had, and I guess jealousy issues, and Molly Flanders seems to be some sort of rich heiress type almost, doesn't have to worry about money or anything, and basically her claim to fame as a child was her last name. She just feels this jealousy, and she's a bit of a kleptomaniac, and I'll kind of leave it at that. and it was an okay story. I don't know. I feel like there wasn't a lot of oomph there compared to other stories, but this really is a very slice-of-life moment where we're dealing with this this emotion that comes up in this person that we've just met and how she handles it. So, I mean, it's okay, it's interesting, but there's been some stories with more depth and more to think about in here. So that's where I stand with this one. Good evening. It is night 7 of Hanukkah. I'm still high off of the news that I was just talking about in the video that I posted tonight. Today I got my PDF of my submission to District Lines, and something cool about District Lines, which is a publication of the local indie bookstore Politics and Prose, is that Michelle Brafman, she's a local author, and she's been published in District Lines, so it's pretty cool to have something in common with someone who's made it as big to have this as her second book. Anyway, the story I read tonight is called Manoah Paps, and it's a story with a framing device that takes place during 2006, the framing device, where this woman who lives in Bertrand Court hears the news over, well, in the paper, I think, about an old college flame who had an accident and died. And so she's preparing to go to the funeral. She actually goes and buys herself a ticket back home to attend this funeral. And then we go back into the past, into this memory she has of meeting this boy's parents when they're in college, I think it is. And it's an interesting meditation on what it's like to meet people and meet someone's parents and somebody who grew up much differently than you did, and sort of, not like a dramatic clash of personalities, but certainly this character grew up in a sort of a loud, opinionated home, and she's having dinner with people who are much more quiet and reserved and doesn't know exactly when to keep her mouth shut. And there's a lot of nice physical imagery in here of the setting, and I liked it. It's just sort of an interesting, I guess, meditation on the framing device. You know, gives it that feel of something a little nostalgic. Good evening. For this, the 8th and final night of Hanukkah, I have my final story, the last story in this collection by Michelle Brafman, to review. This story is called More So, and despite the iffy title, it is definitely my favorite of the 3 stories that I've read in this collection for this part of Hanukkah. It takes place in July of 2007. It's the latest in this collection of stories. They're linked stories, so I do have a sense of these characters a little bit from the other stories, but you can read this as a standalone. This story involves a middle-aged couple, and the man ends up cheating on his wife, and it's not like a serial thing he has going on. In fact, it's a really rare thing, and it's something that he actually doesn't give a lot of thought to after it happens, until the woman who he cheated with calls and said, "Oh, by the way, I just found out an ex had gonorrhea." So, uh-oh. So the story takes place as he's waiting for his results about this STD issue. And meanwhile, his wife actually, you know, is kind of wants to have some action, and he's trying to, you know, find ways to say no. But I mean, that's not the bulk of what's happening. That's just part of it. I mean, we go through those days and we see what their relationship is like, and it's of course a opportunity for the man to bring up his anxieties about his relationship. But for the most part, it's rather understated. It's just a way to go into the normal stuff about fears of middle age, and I found this story really nice. I just found it, like, I found the characters and the things that they were doing very relatable. I say, as someone who is not middle-aged and married and cheating, but but I just really liked it. I thought that the emotions and the place and the setting were all really well done, and really well mapped to this like 15-page short story. So yeah, I'm gonna say that I think we really ended on a high note. And that about wraps it up for me. I actually got this idea for reviewing a short story for every night of Hanukkah, like pretty much right before the holidays started. But I think I'm going to keep it in the back of my mind for next year and maybe plan it out a little more. I mean, it worked out really well here to have a creative way to encourage myself to get through some short story collections that I wanted to get through before the end of the month, so huzzah, but I'll maybe give it a little more thought next year, and we'll see how it goes. In the meantime, I hope that everyone who celebrated Hanukkah had a wonderful holiday filled with light and merriment, and I hope everyone gearing up to celebrate Christmas will have a good one, and happy holidays, everyone. Happy reading. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.